Working Cows Podcast, episode 143.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, powered by the Global Ag Network, and we are truly global again today. Had another opportunity to sit down and talk to Charlie Arnott. He has recently launched a new podcast, and so I wanted to take that opportunity to share that information with my audience, get that word out there as far and wide as we can, because Charlie is one of the truly great folks in this industry doing real good work. And the fact that he was willing to step out and start a podcast is something that I wholeheartedly and fully endorse. We need more agricultural podcasts. We need more regenerative agriculture podcasts, and everybody has their own niche. And we're going to talk about that with Charlie today and about how we can fit more people into this niche because everybody's got a unique perspective to offer. So really looking forward to that. Charlie is a regenerative agriculture practitioner from Australia. He's also a biodynamic educator. We've talked to him about biodynamics on a previous episode, which will be linked in the show notes page today at workingcows.net/143. So check that out. One quick note on the front end, we have been getting a lot of voicemails in from my ruminations episode. If you're interested in responding to that, go to workingcows.net/141. There's a link to the phone number, which is 605-549-5401. There's a link to that at workingcows.net/141. And then there's also the audio of the episode where I solicited those questions. So make sure you jump in there. In the next couple of weeks, I'll be sharing those voicemails on an episode of the Working Cows Podcast. So be looking forward to that, but also jump in and participate in that discussion. Charlie, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Clay, it's wonderful to be here again.
Yeah, quite a bit different scenario than last time we talked, at least on a podcast. I was in my office in western South Dakota in the United States in February, and I know it was below zero because I don't think below 0 degrees Fahrenheit because I don't think we were ever above zero any day in February last year. We set a record for the coldest February on record, and I distinctly remember sharing the video of our conversation to the Patreon supporters of my podcast, and because your background was tropical and birds chirping, and I said, if you're dealing with a long winter, tune in, watch the video of this discussion with Charlie, and you'll get a picture of his surroundings, because obviously being in the southern hemisphere, you are summer when we are winter, and so now we're kind of flip-flopped in a warmer period, and it's almost raining today, which is nice. And so really appreciate you taking the time to join me. I wanted to talk with you today about your newly launched podcast, The Regenerative Journey with Charlie Arnott. Could you tell me a little bit about your idea for the podcast, what you're hoping to accomplish with it?
Clay, well, again, firstly, thank you for having me on the show. I really enjoyed the first interview we did, and I can't imagine a season where the temperature doesn't go above zero. That's crazy. We think it's pretty cold when it's zero for a couple of days. Back to the podcast, though. Look, it's been something I've been wanting to do for some time, and I have to say your podcast inspired me in some ways to do that, because it was such a wonderful medium, to allow people to tell their stories, because I think that's one of the great resources, as it were, that we have as farmers, is the stories that we tell, and the stories that we have. Every day there's essentially a new story, a new adventure, trials and tribulations and challenges, and I think it's good for people to share that because it gets it off their chest, and I think it's really informative. not just for other farmers, but for people who are, buying product straight from farmers or people who haven't even thought about that yet. Because, as I probably said in the previous interview, we try and sell the sizzle, not just the sausage. It's the smell of the story and the smell, that sort of the vibe and the intimacy and the I guess the vulnerability of telling one story that is valuable. So valuable to listeners and valuable to those who are telling the story. So I guess that was the bit of a catalyst, and that's where the passion has come from. I personally, I just love talking to people. I really enjoy finding out, getting people comfortable, obviously, because if people aren't comfortable, they're not going to open up. And if they're comfortable enough to open up, the wisdom and the experience and the yarns, they're just fascinating. And I'm a much better listener than I ever used to be. And I just really enjoy doing it. And I think I've not found the niche, so to speak, but certainly found a real passion for doing that. So it's a little bit of a selfish agenda, Clay, that I just want to hear people's stories. It just so happens that now I can share them with other people.
Yeah. Well, and I've said it many times, and people probably get sick of hearing me say it, but I always say the Working Cows podcast is the most affordable continuing education I've ever done. Yeah,
totally. I have to agree, and you're a few years ahead of me there, no doubt. But yes, it's a wonderful way to improve one's knowledge. But again, as I said, it's to be able to share that with other people. And the beauty with podcasts, as you're aware, where people can pick and choose. If they've done as many of you as you have, there's a vast range of subjects and topics and people. So, and look, a lot of more people are doing podcasts, and for very good reasons, and the same reason. The technology's there, and the stories are out there too.
Well, and I think that no matter how saturated a niche becomes, there's always your voice that's going to be unique in the way that you ask questions and in the way that you communicate. And so I think that there's always more room in every niche for more podcasts, because individuals are unique enough that people can tune in and get a different perspective. Like hearing you interview Joel Salatin on episode 2 of your podcast brings out things I never knew. And I've listened to a lot of Joel Salatin content and interviewed him myself. You had to start your own podcast for me to learn that he was the son of a Venezuelan accountant chicken farmer. His dad was, of course, American, but he went to Venezuela to help in the oil boom with Texas oil companies, and as a bilingual guy, and was an accountant / chicken farmer. And I didn't know that. And they fled, basically. He described it. The machine guns came in the front door, and we went out the back door, and they spent 14 months trying to get their farm back, and didn't work. So there's a little teaser for the regenerative journey, and encouragement for people to go and find it and tune in, because it's stuff like that. Like I said, your voice brings a unique perspective that nobody else can duplicate, and so there's always going to be room for more podcasts.
Yeah, well, thank you, Clay. And I guess also I don't ever profess to be an expert in anything, really. And I think this is for me the goal is to tap into the expertise of those who, whether it's a farmer, a doctor, a chef. And not just like a Joel Sullivan farmer who's world famous, but the farmers who are at the coalface who aren't necessarily telling everyone about it, but they're doing a wonderful job of producing nutrient-dense food, caring for their environment, their ecology, and just good people, So I really want to give them an opportunity to share their stories as well, which are as fascinating as a Joel Sullivan story, because they're on the land, they're working with the land and with nature, and they're they're suffering the same trials and tribulations and challenges as anyone else who, as I said, is world famous. Because farmers are experts in themselves, aren't they? Really, and they're pretty good pretty much everything: plumbing and they're sort of electricians, they're animal handlers, they're bookkeepers, they're negotiators, they're all sorts of things. So they're really pretty fascinating people. And as are doctors that I'd be interviewing, we're looking at more alternative therapies and angles like Dr. Zach Bush. I'll be interviewing him in a couple of months when he's out here, or if not before. Nicole Masters, who I trust you've heard of, who spends a lot of time in Montana actually, but she's amazing. Probably one of the best soil scientists in the world at the moment. Matt Moran, who's one of Australia's top chefs. I'll be interviewing him shortly. So it's just, I don't know, I love it. I mean, you've got the bug too, clearly, Clay, because here we are at least 18 months after we've had our first interview, and you're still going and doing a top job. So you've there's something in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have interviewed Nicole as well and talked about her book and everything. And it's just, so I had a guy reach out to me one time, and he said he wanted to start a podcast. That individual is Jason Meadows of the Ag State of Mind podcast. And I said, well, I know you feel like intimidated that you're not going to have enough content, but when you start interviewing people and they start mentioning other people you should interview, and then your guests or your listeners start reaching out to you and saying, here's somebody you should interview, you're going to feel like a cat with a laser pointer darting from one person to the next that you should be interviewing. And because every person opens up 5 or 10 more people you should interview. And so you never run out of people to talk to. And again, even in one hour conversation, you don't obviously exhaust that person's knowledge of all of the different things they know. As you said, especially in this industry, people tend to be so varied in their emphasis and their expertise, and so there's always more opportunity to talk to somebody again and gather another nugget of wisdom from them.
Again, yeah, no, absolutely. I know that's what I'm finding, Clay, is that there are just there's just an unlimited number of people. As you say, you talk to someone and they mention someone's name, and you go, "Wow, that'll be the next one." And then I think if I added it up, I've probably got another 6 series in front of me. That just if I was to interview people that I'd really love to, let alone the ones I'm going to meet in between. I think I could be stuck. Clay. I could be doing a full-time job. I actually would love it if it wasn't a full-time job, to be honest. But anyway, no, it's and so again, thank you for sort of inspiring me to get this off the ground.
Yeah, I love it. I'm glad to be part of the journey. And so, what are you're talking about series? Are you doing seasons of your podcast, recording them in a bunch in advance, and then releasing them over a period of weeks, and then taking a break, or how are you going to approach that?
Good question, Clay. We'll be this first series we're releasing one a week up until I think so there's the first 3, and then there's another 6 episodes that we'll be releasing every week from next Tuesday. That's the first series, which has been very gratefully supported by Landcare Australia as part of a Bob Hawke Landcare Award I won a couple of years ago. So that's series 1. Series 2, I'm not sure who's going to support that one. Anyone who's got any ideas who would love to, I'd love to hear from you. But I think the scope of the interviews will be a little wider. With Landcare Australia, we wanted to sort of keep it reasonably sort of tight to farming and agriculture, a bit of practice and philosophy there. But with Series 2 and beyond, I think I know I'll be spreading that a bit further to chefs and doctors and, investment side of it, natural capital opportunities, and there's just so many guests out there. So I really don't know. Beyond Series 1, Clay, I've got lots of ideas, lots of opportunities, how we structure that. I think it'll be once a week. As I said, as long as I can keep lining up those interviews. And I love to do them face to face is another thing. Obviously, that won't be necessarily something I'll be able to achieve, every time. But I just feel when you're sitting in someone's garden or in their paddock, and you just gazing upon their canvas, what they're painting out there and what they're doing in their world. It's just such an inspiring for both. For me, is that prompting questions and for the interviewee to just be at least relaxed and then have kind of subject matter to prompt them as well. So no, it's great fun. Great fun. And look, we've had some just to give it a bit of a plug, I guess, Clay. We've only launched a couple of days ago, less than 2 days ago, and we've had nearly 3,500 unique downloads at this point. Now, I actually don't know if that's really good.
Yeah, it's very
terrible. I think it could be terrible, but the good news is that it feels okay. We're getting really nice comments and feedback, and it feels good, and I'm sure you had the same feeling when you launched yours, that you put so much work into it, and then you get over the line, as it were, with a launch, and then you sort of go, oh, hang on, what's next? Should I be doing something else? And how do I sort of keep this machine going? But anyway, it's all good fun, and we're learning a lot on the way.
I was sitting in a Dave Pratt class almost a month and a half after I launched my podcast, before I broke 1,000 downloads. Now, I started from zero. I started as a recent graduate of a continuing education course where somebody said I should start a podcast, and that somebody's Dallas Mount, who's gone on to take over ranch management consultants. So, anyways, I started from nothing. I didn't have any audience, but anyways, it took a long time to build it, and I'm really glad to hear that you're getting that kind of traction right off the bat. That's awesome. That is very good. So I'll tell you that from my perspective. Anyways, you're doing a great job, and I've gotten to listen to at least the first part of a couple of those episodes, and the sound quality is well done. So good on you for that. I'm really happy to hear that. Maybe I'm a bit of a snob, but it makes it very listenable, and I can tell you're doing some good work there.
Well, Clay, thank you. As I said before, I really enjoy it, and anyway, look, it's all new territory, and it feels good at this stage. So unless I can think of a reason to stop, I won't at this point.
So I guess I submitted to my private Facebook group or asked them if they had any questions for you, and one of them comes from Matt Doyle, who's a fellow Australian. I'm not sure if you know Matt, but
he only lives about 30 minutes away from me.
Oh, well, that's like a next door neighbor in Australia, right?
You're pretty much the same.
Yeah. It is actually where I'm at now too. It's pretty close relatively. So, but anyways, he says he wants to know what inspires Charlie to keep putting himself out there as a leader of the regen movement, and how he handles the opposition from the status quo in farming circles.
Great. We call Matt Monkey. I don't think he'll mind me saying that. I played a rugby union with him for some years here at the local town. He's a top fella. Matthew. So, and they're very closely related, those questions, really, because it was because of the status quo, and there was a feeling of guilt. There was a feeling of guilt when I was conventionally farming, industrial farming, whatever you want to call it. Of what I was doing to potentially three things, probably lots of things, but one was the environment. So I was spraying a lot of chemical and doing a lot of damage with ploughing and carrying on. The second thing was the food I was producing, not that I was considering it food. That was certainly of very poor quality at the end of it. When I think about, the full scope of what is quality, there's a lot of chemical on there. So there was a sense of guilt, I guess, that, I'd been mining the environment, and I'd probably been poisoning people. So I didn't feel very comfortable about that. So there was not that I'm not into blaming, but I guess I was certainly thinking, wow, this industrial type of farming, which is propped up by the status quo attitude, the status quo inputs, was not sustainable in my mind, and it was actually I was responsible, absolutely, but I guess the constant supply to farmers of these sort of inputs, responsibility they've got to take as well. So there was a sense of guilt, there was a sense of, accountability, and So I guess that relates also to my turning point of changing. But, we have, I guess it's just, in my character to want to push back. I was never necessarily one to go with the status quo in my youth or life and so on. So I guess it was just a reflection of that sort of general attitude. And, yeah, just, and I guess being reasonably comfortable to talk about it. And so that was the sort of the internal stuff for me. The external stuff was the support I got, the encouragement I got. That there was a pretty quiet but large community of people who were already doing this, and I was certainly no Robinson Crusoe. There were plenty of people who've been doing this stuff for decades. And as I discovered them, and as I spoke with them, and as some of them became my mentors, it's a slippery slope. You can't unknow this stuff. So I certainly was encouraged by them, and I started seeing results as well, and results in myself and my attitude, results in the paddock, and there was much less stress in my life, especially on the farm, and so that was I guess that was what keeps me going. How I respond to the industrial ag machine or any criticism, whatever. Look, I generally am polite and diplomatic. I can be a little barbed sometimes, but and that generally happens on social media and that sort of thing. I've been rung up and abused and told that I, accused of you don't plant trees and you're killing things and all that sort of stuff. And look, that's fine. It's actually, I actually think it's quite funny. Not funny. It's amusing, not in a smug way, but it's actually like, wow. As I say to my children and my people that when someone's angry, people are mean when they're fearful, and I always sort of sit back and go, wow, that person must be really afraid or anxious or to be so vitriolic and to be mean about things, whether it's on a post or verbally, So and I just think the way to respond is to be compassionate, and don't add fuel to the fire. So that's it. But I have a I can't remember where I picked up this quote, Clay, but I love it. It's, if you don't have a few enemies, you're not having a go. You got to be pushing, and I'm sure, I'm pretty sure Joel, I read somewhere the other day, he has a similar one, or there's others. But there's if you're not pushing a few buttons and upsetting a few people, there's a fair chance that you're not keeping a whole lot more people happy. Not keeping them happy, but making them happy, or giving them something to think about, or something to live for, or inspiring other people. If we can't please everyone at the end of the day. That's hopefully I've answered your couple of questions there, Monkey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess where I want to go from there is, could you share with me your definition of regenerative agriculture, and to maybe prime the pump or give you a little time to think about that? Kind of what hit me the other day as I was thinking about this is basically we want more strength that's what we're producing in regenerative agriculture. We're producing more strength. We're producing more strength in the ecosystem, more strength in our animals, more strength in the soil, more strength in the family relationships connected to the business, and more strength in the financial areas of the business. So I guess that's my simple definition of it. How would you define it, or how have you defined it?
That's a great question, and that's a podcast series right there, Clay. Look, I try and keep it simple. I sort of refer to Charlie Massey's 5 ecosystem function. There's a bit of a definition, and being the solar, the water, the mineral, and the biological cycles, and also including the sort of the people community sort of dynamics as well. So any practice or philosophy that is improving any one of those is of a regenerative nature, I would say, and also just, I guess, to overlay that with the improvement or the increasing of quality and quantity of soil, that being an underlying theme or principle that all those other landscape functions, they're all contributing to and a consequence of the soil and its improved health and and quantity, because if we're building organic matter, we're also increasing the quantity. So that's my very basic one. I agree with you about the strengthening. What makes something more, something stronger, and anything is a high degree of complexity, not complication, but complexity, whereby under any given stress, there's something in that system, there's something in that business or in that landscape that can bear the brunt of that stress. So whether it's rainfall impact landing on ground, well, the grass and the ground cover will be the thing that will take that stress or that impact. As a very simple example. So the more dynamic and complex the system being the farm and the ecology and the people and so on, then the more chance you're going to resist those negative impacts. So these things are just wonderful in the alchemy and the symbiosis that that what is that expression? I always get it wrong. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. If you have more things to add up, more things that are the total sum, then the whole is much stronger. So, but back to the definition. Look, there's so many. None of them are wrong, I don't think. It's just what people are really comfortable with. I think everyone will apply their own sort of perspective to how they see that. I guess to set it apart from sustainable, that's an old word now that is, as we say, is a status quo, and we don't want to sustain something that's a situation that is depleted, as it were. So, and look, there's probably other words that are as good a description of what we're trying to do as regenerative. I often say to people that I quite like the word generative farming, because it's regenerative can sometimes feel like you're putting a cap on it. You're regenerating it to a point. Whatever point that is that you choose, that's fine, but maybe it's a point to where it used to be. Generative farming is just, you are generating soil, you are generating health, you are generating all sorts of things that are all intertwined, but there's a general generative movement, But anyway, that's probably splitting hairs a bit, but there you go.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of a contrast between extractive and generative. Either you're pulling things out and you're kind of eating the soil bank or eating the root system, eating the soil life with every bite, or you're putting something back because you're not letting them stay there too long.
Yeah, that's right. I guess there's always cycling, and the cycles ebb and flow. There's carbon here and then there's carbon there, and I guess a lot of people, and it's interesting. Zach Bush got me thinking about this in terms of the carbon cycle. It's not all about sequestering carbon, because if we go and sequester all the carbon, and keep just sequestering in sort of a one-way fashion, or a net sort of a flow in one way into the soil, then carbon is the foundation of life, and every cycle in the world is carbon is involved. So we've as you say, when you're eating grass, well, you're removing something, and then that senesces its roots, and so but you're actually killing roots or you're reducing it. Well, yeah, that's all part of the carbon cycle. That's all it's the give and the take that nature, which is the nature of nature, and it's a whole nother conversation around, vegan versus meat, is that, the nature, the life and death, there is no life without death. And so, when we can consider that and can acknowledge that, then we're in a much better position to have conversations around what is natural, whether it's what humans have been doing for thousands or millions of years, or what the natural cycles are of nature and the life cycles of nature. So, again, there's probably another podcast series just there, Clay.
I always think it's kind of ironic when we get lectured by the vegan crowd, because as far as I understand it, most of the vegan staples, as far as the foods that make up the majority of their diet, depend on a fairly heavy level of tillage. And so if we're going to talk about life impacted by a food system, if we're talking about number of lives and probably weight, if you wanted to go by the weight of the lives impacted by a food system, I don't know who's going to come out. I know they're going to come out on top as far as the number of lives it costs to produce each meal. I don't know. They might even beat us on the weight it costs to produce each meal, as far as life that is taken in the production of a typical vegan meal. And so I think that it's not really a winning conversation. I don't think. I guess if somebody wants to go and live on a plant-based diet, that's fine. More power to them. They can do that. But if they're going to try and lecture us and say you can't, you're taking a life. Well, I'm taking a life that looks cute on a calendar, but for life to be sustained, there has to be death. You can't get around it.
No, and I want to reference a book on eating meat by Matthew Evans. He's a lovely. He's a chef, and then he was a food critic, and now he's a farmer. So he's really sort of gone full circle. It's fantastic because he very diplomatically, and probably the wrong word, but in a very balanced way looks at all the angles. And he's very, scientific and factual in the numbers he's using. But I mean, one of the things that really struck me is that I think, if you drill down, whether it's sort of the ethics or the health or the economics or the environmental, whatever it is, those who don't like eating meat, I'll call them, or people who don't like other people eating meat, it's all about suffering. The thing is about suffering, and so degree of suffering and so on. But your point about numbers is interesting because in Australia, it's been a few months since I read the book, but the numbers of native wildlife in Australia killed by feral cats, so cats that have gone feral, is in the hundreds of thousands a night. All right, and they just don't kill them; they play with them and they literally torture them. There is a massive amount of suffering that goes on every night in the Australian landscape because feral cats are killing wild animals. Now, that's significant. And if there was to be money or time spent or effort spent on and getting the best outcome of reducing suffering, it would be the removal of every feral cat in Australia. So you can't have that conversation with vegans because they've probably got a cat at home, or because they're soft and fluffy. The whole idea of shooting or killing, trapping a wild cat, is abhorrent to them. Now, they just won't do it. And then then you can have conversations around, well, okay, if you've got a cat, what are you feeding it? Are you feeding it meat? Well, you're a hypocrite. If you're feeding it a cereal-based food, well, you're a torture. So. So that's a very simple sort of not that it's about it. It's not a competition. It's not about going to war with anyone. It's just like, well, let's stand back and look at the whole picture. Now that's just one part of it. You talked about plant-based diet and fantastic. I had a lot of plants and they're delicious. Grow a lot of them our own. I had the best cauliflower last night ever. We don't not the best cauliflower growers in the world, but we had an amazing. I'll post a picture of it there one day, Clay. Anyway, my point is, I think I've got the numbers right. In Victoria, or at least Australia, and down on the border of Victoria and New South Wales, they grow a lot of rice. And about 30,000 ducks are shot each year just to protect the rice because they're considered a pest. Now, someone sitting down to a wholesome bowl of rice, organic or not, they have contributed to the death of a number of ducks. You can't escape that. So that's another example. And then you talk about rats and mice in fields, beetles, whatever being sprayed. It is. I mean, it's not in a smug way. It's amusing that such an obvious thing, such a clear set of circumstances and facts about the production of plants, even organic plants, there is death involved, and for people to ignore that for convenience so they can bag out a beef producer, you just don't bother having that conversation because there's no transparency, there's no integrity in that conversation.
There's no self-criticism. There's no questioning of your own.
No. no acknowledgement that of nature. I don't know. I'll probably get in trouble for saying it, but I mean, a lot of people everyone's got their own thing, their own barrow to push and sort of set of principles and things to do. But a lot of people are very green, as they call them greenies, and they very, and it's a bit of a broad sort of a definition, greenies, but very socially and very outwardly green and environmentally conscious. But you go, how many trees have you planted in your life? Like having a keep cup is not going to win you the best environmentalist award of the year. Like a keep cup's fine, but there's so many wonderful things that people can be doing, whether it's sourcing food directly from farmers, going and planting trees on a property, joining a local land care group. I'm not sure what equivalent you have over there in the States in terms of land care, like a national organisation. There's so many things people can do.
There's NRCS, there's Grazing Lands Coalition.
Yeah, cool. So there's opportunity for people to really contribute in a meaningful way. And, look, I've got keep cups. I'm not saying they're bad, but, I'd like to think I'm doing a little bit more than getting the morning coffee in a cup that doesn't get thrown away, So I'm not bagging those people. I'm just saying there's so much we can do, and there's really no excuse. And there's no excuse for people to not be informed, and I guess my podcast, your podcast, they're examples of what we're trying to do is get people to make, considered decisions about their health, their food, who they support, where they go, and how what they're teaching their kids. I guess that's sort of something that it underlies a lot of the things I do and say and interviews and so on. Is like a job as parents is to prepare our children to leave us. And if our kids leave us and they're eating crap food, they're overweight, they've got no idea. It's like a monoculture, isn't it? You go plant a field of wheat, and and that field of wheat is not supported and hasn't had its, it's GM wheat, so it's sort of stuffed up anyway, and it hasn't got the support. It hasn't had a good supportive start in life. It's going to need chemical put on it. It's going to need support. It's going to need, then the pest is going to eat it, so you got to spray it for this. It's a similar thing. Like if you're sending kids out into the world who are not prepared, haven't had the foundation, they haven't been nurtured. They're a seed. They're germinating as they grow, and it's almost like when 18 or 21 in the world of Steiner, it's really 28. When you hit the age 28, you're really at your peak in a way. The kids people getting to the age of 28, and that's giving them a bit of extra time, Clay. I mean, I'm thinking 17, 18 is when they're leaving their parents. That's when they want to be prepared. But they need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. So look, again, that's I'm pretty passionate about that. That they're our future. I know it's a cliche, but cliches. They're important. And people say them a lot, and I'll say it again. Our kids are our future, and to prepare them to leave us, to then basically, be part of the world and contribute in a meaningful way, other than a keep cup, is that's our job. That's our job to get them to that point.
And it's basically what you're talking about, and comparing fields and animals and kids is we want to make things more resilient. We want to make things, grow things that don't need a lot of external inputs to survive, that can basically handle it on their own.
That's a great way to put it, Clay. External inputs, like in the world of biodynamics, Steiner and, Steiner schools. My daughter goes to the Steiner school. So it's similar, I guess, in the States. You've got Steiner schools or Waldorf schools and so on. So, the best way I can explain that is, and I spoke to the headmaster at another school, Steiner school some years ago, and he said, in most schools, they try to stuff a whole lot of information into a vessel. So the child is a vessel that contains information, and they're just stuffing it in. And there could be holes all through that vessel. It's going to come out, and it's going to get messy and spill, and they're going to deplete. In a Steiner school, as an example, of a call it a green school or a natural school, whatever, they create this vessel first, and they make sure the vessel can contain any information put in there and can interpret that. So and I like, again, back to your, the input thing. Like, we don't want kids going to the world who need constant input, input or need to be supported by a whole lot of other people. When we're young, we're dependent, as children, because we just, physically and mentally and so on, we just can't. We are dependent on our children. And as we get older, we want to be independent, because that's what you do when you get older. You don't need mum and dad anymore. I can do this. I know what's best. And that's just a phase. And then they, probably about the age of 28, they move into a phase of interdependence. And it's two-way. They're contributing to, others, the society, community, and they're being contributed to. And there's a beautiful synergy there. So, they're not, as you say, they're not dependent on constant input. There's a lot of output as well, but it's positive and it's constructive and it's complex in its nature, and it's just like nature is always moving towards a state of diversity, diversity of thinking, diversity of activity, diversity, this goes to the steps into the Zach Bush world, diversity of nature and your exposure to it and your absorption of it, literally. You put some of these kids into nature and they either run scared because think that some drop bear is going to land on them or something, or they get sick, if they're there long enough, because they've got allergies or things, and it's just this. I don't know. Look, we're creating quite a few podcast series here, Clay. This is a whole other one, isn't it? This conversation.
Yeah, like I said, that cat with a laser pointer, you're just darting from one spot to the next, and you got ideas coming out the woodwork. So I do want to be respectful of your time. I do want to let people know today's show notes page is going to be workingcows.net/143, workingcows.net/143. There will be links to Charlie's podcast. There'll be links to the previous episode that Charlie and I have done. There will be links to the book on eating meat by Matthew Evans. Found that, and I'll throw a link up there. But very closely related to what you've discussed, and kind of maybe a nice bow on this episode is maybe your answer to this question, again from the private Facebook group. What are a few things that you've done to jumpstart the biodiversity of your property?
Great question. So I guess most recently we have we've sowed back in early March, some multi-species annual pasture species. When I say pasture, they're not traditionally pasture species, but some cereals, some peas, some vetch, buckwheat, safflower, daikon radish. There's probably about 12 in there. So we drill that into a somewhat tired pasture, a pasture that land we bought probably 10, 15 years ago, that we had just been we'd had in intensive care, I guess you'd say, for a while, and now we think it's time to just try and change the pattern there and sort of kickstart some succession. So that's really, I was talking to Scotty Hickman this morning, who just before we spoke there, and he's a grazing officer here near Burrawa, Clay, which is another conversation. Just as a bit of a segue, it's a group of farmers and related to the local land care group here at Burrawa, and we meet every few months on people's properties. We talk about their grazing practices and these sort of questions sort of come up. But that's a government supported position, and it's fantastic. It's called a grazing officer, and it's something that I think would be fantastic if we had that all over the world. So multi-species pasture is something. I think the benefits of that will come in years 2 and 3. We might get some extra feed. We're going to kickstart some biodiversity because there's plants in there now that have never been there before. They're introducing a whole different range of proteins and biology, and biodynamics is another one, and that's just a broad philosophy and practice across the whole of our property here, which is another conversation. We talked about that in the first episode. So that's one. Mm-hmm. Having different animals, we've got sheep, we've got cattle, we've got pigs. They're the domestic ones. By creating habitat areas with native species, we're encouraging the diversity or the increased and diversity of native species, whether that be birds or reptiles or marsupials and mammals and so on. So we're encouraging them to come back. So we're sort of, we've got a lot of kangaroos. We've actually got too many kangaroos on here for the moment, but that's our fault for sort of providing grass and water. So by basically creating, habitat sinks, we're dragging in and we're creating, we're bringing back the diversity, in some ways. Having said that, we're also planting a lot of exotic species like elm, oak, willow, poplar, honey locust. We've got a few little sort of food forests that are being created in a few spots, and there's carob and there's fig and there's citrus and there's mulberry and all sorts of things. So there are going to be these nutrient and biological sinks here and there, which are producing food for humans and food for pigs, and also dropping little. They're basically reservoirs of different biology and complex biology, which I trust. And the sort of one of ours is on top of a hill, so there's going to be a bit of a nutrient flow down from there. So there's plants, introducing different plants, introducing different animals. Having different people here is a type of biology, different type of biology we're introducing. We're sort of looking at how we get a few more people on Hanamino, our property here, to be involved with some profit share type farming with pigs and chickens and vegetables. So, I think that's something we often forget about, is the biology above the ground that is on two legs, and that the more community we have, and it doesn't have to be within the bounds of our property, it's the connections we have with the local town, the local region, and it's the fifth landscape function that Charlie Massey talked about. So, it's never ending. We're thinking about putting in some olives. We've got a few, but, making a bit of a grove. So it's never ending, Clay. It's a great question. It's got me thinking more, but, and even looking at some of the natural sequence farming stuff at the moment as well, to sort of, put in some swales and that sort of thing. That's going to shift things again, I think. So it's pretty exciting.
Very good. Very good. You said intensive care. Was that like intensively grazed, or this was land that was in the hospital that needed some very special nurturing and care?
Well, I guess it was, we've been managing it accordingly. So it was, we hadn't just locked it up and hoped that it recovered. Its history, I guess, had been that of some pretty set stock sheep farming for many generations. It was coming. A lot of the native species had been eaten out. There'd been no, there hadn't really been any introduced species sown there, like cocksfoot or polaris or any sort of exotic clovers. So it was really a lot of annuals in there, and it was just time to. And we weren't working it hard, basically, but the time came and said, this is a great opportunity to experiment. And that's it's a bit of an experimental phase at the moment, but it was it went from ICU, Clay, to sort of like I don't know what's the next phase down from there. Not palliative care yet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. So how are the cover crops sown?
We've got a machine ourselves, a little sort of a combine, but we used a neighbour kindly did that for us, and he created a little bit more disturbance. So I think he's got 7-inch spacings on a John Shearer combine, knife points, a few rocks over there. So we don't go for the discs. 50 kilos of this mix, this pasture seed. And we also put in a product which is a pelletized worm casting, or worm liquid, called Worm Hit. Chris Curran, a fellow who's sort of patented that technology, I guess you'd call it, but it's fantastic stuff. Nutrisoils down there in just over the border in Victoria, I guess, help create or supply him some of the liquid. He pelletizes it, and we put that on at 50 kilos a hectare as well. And we've sort of left a couple of test strips, pretty rough sort of an experiment, but we're seeing some benefits at this stage. It's early days. We're going to start grazing it with some some merino weather lambs probably next week, just to take the top off some of the cereals and let it chiller, encourage it to chiller. Some of the radish needs eating. And it's a little bit uneven. Some of the high points in the sheep camps, old sheep camps, are doing better than some of the low country, different soil. But it's good fun. It's experimental at this stage, Faye, but I'll be keeping everyone up to speed with its progress.
I really appreciate your time today, Charlie. Any final words or anything else you wanted to share? I'd give you that opportunity to go ahead and share that.
Well, look, thank you, Clay. I guess thank you again for the time, your wonderful effort in podcasting, giving people the forum to tell their stories. I guess the listeners could also find out a bit more about me on our website. It's not complete. We are being sort of upgraded as we speak, but functional. And the intention of that is to be a resource where people can basically jump on there. And we're thinking, we sort of put our audience into three categories in a sort of a rough way. One is a farmer. They could be conventional farmers wanting to transition. They could be people who aren't farmers at all, but they want to be farming. And they could be just hardcore regenerative farmers who just want to know what's the next thing that's happening. So there's sort of a section for them to go on their own little journey, choose their own adventure, so to speak. We've also got the section for chefs, because they're the bit in the middle between the farmers and the eaters. These guys are the feeders. They're the ones who turn our food up to 11, as it were. They really they appreciate the nutrient density of our not our food, but good farming food. And they're that vital link. They're good communicators. They've got that. They are the link, really, in many ways and many times to the eaters. And then we've got a section for the eaters. So that might be, mums with kids. It might be, anyone who's just wants to know more about food and farming, And then through that little journey they go, they're going to learn about health. They're going to learn about some, people like Dr. Libby Weaver, who is an amazing woman here in Australia, and she's known around the world, and she's just got some amazing principles and concepts and ideas and programs for good health, and good nutrition. Could be meditation. Nico Plowman, a cousin of mine, a lovely bloke, he's a meditation teacher. Those sort of things are the things we want people to understand. That regenerative agriculture is not just growing good food. It's about relationships. It's about good health. It's about global environmental health. It's about community. So. We want people to jump on the website and have fun.
And what website is that? Is that charliearnott.com.au? That's it. Yep. Okay.
Wonderful.
Sounds good. Yep, I see it here, and good looking podcast player on there. People can listen right from there. So that will also be in the links at the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/143. Charlie, thanks for your time.
It's been lovely, and I trust we get to speak again soon, and keep up the amazing work.
Will do. Thank you. Again, don't forget 605-549-5401 if you want to participate in the discussion in an upcoming episode of the Working Cows podcast. I will be playing those voicemails. If you want to respond to the questions that I asked at workingcows.net/141, go ahead and listen to that episode, and then respond to those questions by leaving a voicemail at 605-549-5401. Next week, we're going to talk to Brian Mose of Mose Feedlot LLC near Watertown, South Dakota. He is a guy that I serve on the South Dakota Farm Bureau Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee. A really interesting guy. Him and his family were up for a sustainability award through NCBA not long ago, and so doing some really neat things there. And we're going to talk to him about his business and the impact that Performance Beef has had on that business, and some of the things that they are doing to make sure that their business is as sustainable as possible. So be sure to tune in for that next week on the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.